There have, across the timelines, across the fixed points of times, across the history of it all, been several attempts to bring Doctor Who to the big screen. There have been 2 successful attempts to bring Doctor Who to the big screen. A third film starring Peter Cushing was eventually abandoned. All stories for another time. This story is about what happened in the 2010s when, out of the blue, the director of the Harry Potter films suddenly announced he was making Doctor Who.
We would be honoured if you would join us.
This is an unusual film story, then. That it's a film story about a film that never got made, just to give you the spoiler. But it's also one about... It's a story that just kind of seized the clickbait machine and social media at a point where social media wasn't as big, and loads of websites for just like about a year. And it came out of the blue in 2011, towards the end of 2011, when a director by the name of David Yates gave an interview to Variety. Now, David Yates had sprung to blockbuster prominence off the back of the back 4 Harry Potter films that, by the time you get to the end of the original Harry Potter saga, the films are making absolutely tons of money. Yates has proven himself as someone who could wrestle special effects and story. He channeled some of that into doing a Legend of Tarzan film, which still flies under lots of radar. But in the gap between him doing Harry Potter and then going on to do a Fantastic Beasts ill-fated trilogy of films, he gave this interview. And so, as reported by Variety, on November the 14th, 2011, Harry Potter director David Yates, it said, is teaming up with the BBC to turn its iconic sci-fi TV series Doctor Who into a big screen franchise. This came as a surprise. It came as a surprise to fans of Doctor Who. Crucially, it appeared to come to something of a surprise to the people who are making Doctor Who as well. So, Yates, goes to the Variety piece, who directed the last 4 Potter films, said that he's about to start working on a Doctor Who movie with Jane Tranter, head of Los Angeles-based BBC Worldwide Productions. Now, Jane Tranter, I think, is key to this story because come the mid-2000s, her role was Controller of Drama Commissioning for the BBC. Crucially, one of the decisions she'd made, and that it bore spectacular fruit, was recommissioning Doctor Who. That under the stewardship of its new showrunner, Russell T Davies, she was persuaded to bring Doctor Who back, 13 episodes on a Saturday night. 2015 it debuted, it turned into a rating smash, and it turned into a massive commercial juggernaut for the BBC and BBC Worldwide as well. It was a huge hit. It was Tranter's decision. It was Davies's work, as well as a whole bunch of people. But Doctor Who was now firmly back. It looked quite different to the show that had left BBC One in 1989, say for a 1996 television movie starring Paul McGann. And it was a big thing. And Tranter, I mean, she would leave her job at the BBC and move to a role of Executive Vice President of Programming and Production at BBC Worldwide in Los Angeles in early 2009. The remit there, fairly clear. Take the work of the BBC, slap bang into the middle of Hollywood and Hollywoodland, all of that, the American market, and see what could be done. And one of the things that believed that Tranter was keen to push was doing more and more Doctor Who. Now, this was not a surprise because Doctor Who had gone from from its 2005 revival to become one of the BBC's biggest dramas. That if you go to the 1st of January 2010, this was the episode of Doctor Who, The End of Time Part 2, where David Tennant's hugely popular Doctor regenerated into Matt Smith. This was, it's really kind of hard to wrap your head around it in the fractured way TV is done now. Half of the watching audience that night, half of the people tuned into television in the UK on the 1st of January 2010 were watching that episode of Doctor Who. It was an astonishing success. I think the only episode that outperformed it was Christmas Special with Kylie Minogue. It was a massive, an 8-figure audience in the UK. And the merchandise money piling in and the attention really had been turned onto the show. Now, that episode, The End of Time Part 2, marked the departure not just of David Tennant, but also of Russell T Davies as the showrunner of Doctor Who. He would return, but the new showrunner was Stephen Moffat, who at this point had written some of the revived Doctor Who's most popular, well-regarded episodes. And so it was a case that Russell T Davies was going to head over to America. Stephen Moffat was coming in to run Doctor Who at BBC Wales. And going back to David Yates' explanation in that Variety article, we're looking at writers now, he said. I mean, it sounded quite far down the line. We're going to spend 2 to 3 years to get it right. It needs quite a radical transformation to take it into the bigger arena. So he was saying this at the end of 2011. By this point, Stephen Moffat's first series of Doctor Who, starring Matt Smith, had screened. His second series was very much on the way as well. The article made clear that the movie adaptation, as David Yates has said, would not follow on from the current TV series, but would take a completely fresh approach to the material. Russell T Davies and then Stephen Moffat, said David Yates, have done their own transformations, which were fantastic, but we have to put that aside and start from scratch. Well, this was really odd, because Doctor Who was successfully running in the UK at this point. It was still a BBC success, still a hit. Matt Smith was proving popular as the new Doctor. And there's someone in America, a British director talking about doing this in America that's just, quote, start from scratch. Yates and Tranter were said to be looking for writers on both sides of the Atlantic. And David Yates said, we want a British sensibility. But, he argued, having said that, Steve Kloves, an American, wrote the Harry Potter films and captured that British sensibility perfectly. So we're looking at American writers too. It was an incredible moment for Doctor Who fans. I am one. When this sparked. And it just looked doomed to failure very, very quickly because, I mean, Stephen Moffat, the man in charge of Doctor Who at this point, didn't seem to know anything about it. Or at the very least, I mean, generously you could say, knew just like very, very brief outline. But, I mean, the impression was he knew nothing about it. Now, the editor of Doctor Who magazine, the former editor, is a man called Tom Spilsbury, and he went onto Twitter back when Twitter was vaguely nice and explained, he filled in some of the gaps of what had happened. So, when Russell T Davies left Doctor Who, he went to America, and the idea was that he was going to do dramas over there. And so he took the Doctor Who spin-off series, Torchwood, to the US network Starz. Now, Starz was going to put a bit more money in. They were going to do a new series of Torchwood called Torchwood Miracle Day. With a bit of American money, they could make it bigger, try and make it a bit more of a worldwide thing. And it was said that while Davies was working in the US on Torchwood Miracle Day, which would film in America and would film in Wales, there was, quote, a notion to do a Doctor Who movie, as Tom Spilsbury wrote, but it hadn't got very far. Now, David Yates had clearly been sounded out, and there was an implication, never really confirmed, that Russell T Davies would have been involved had this progressed, that he was in Los Angeles at this point, and so he could have smoothed over the Wales side and the American side and kind of glued it all together a bit. But tragedy intervened, long-term tragedy, that in 2011, Russell T Davies' partner, future husband, got ill with a brain tumour, and he would pass from that brain tumour tragically young in 2018. It meant that Davies changed his life. He went from America very quickly back to the UK to be with his husband, caring for him through his illness and spending time together. And what that meant was that the plans he'd had for developing television, potentially film projects in America, were also dropped. That Torchwood ended pretty much at that point. And so he dropped out of the work that he was doing with BBC Worldwide with Jane Tranter, and the Doctor Who movie was in the midst of that. And yet David Yates had still talked about it. Now, Yates, as I understand it, wasn't supposed to talk about it. It was well ahead of time. And the idea was, had it worked through, was that Russell T Davies would join up BBC Worldwide in America with BBC Wales and would have an involvement, and a lot of the tensions that suddenly sprung up when David Yates made his pronouncement would have been managed, would have been worked with. And the problem was that by David Yates giving that interview, it put a lot of people's backs up, and it basically killed the momentum of the project, because instead of working out, is this feasible, can we press forward, all of a sudden, it was letting off a metaphorical grenade with the Doctor Who team back at BBC World. What the hell is this? Why is he saying all of this stuff? Are you really going to have like two different Doctors, two different Doctor Who projects going side by side at the same time? What is this? I mean, there is history for this, but sort of look how that ended up. Still, even by the end of 2011, it wasn't dead. The BBC itself was quoted in a BBC article as saying a Doctor Who feature film remains in development with BBC Worldwide Productions in Los Angeles. The project is unlikely to reach cinemas for several years. No shit. And as yet, there is no script, cast or production crew in place. But go forward a month after all this has exploded, after there's been the pushback, the confusion, the frantic conversations behind the scenes. And David Yates is on the red carpet for another event, does an interview with MTV in December 2011. And he's reiterating again, yeah, this is it. This is happening. It's a long way away, he said. We're still looking for a writer. And he was insistent everything starts with a great script. He says, we're getting someone else. It won't be Russell T Davies. It won't be Stephen Moffat. And he said, it's such a wonderful character, such a wonderful world. It's exciting. Now, the footage of Yates on the red carpet being interviewed by MTV, he looks a little bit nervous about it all, but he just says it's a long journey and so far away. And this was around the point where the rumour mill seemed to throw in, I think Johnny Depp's name came in at this point. And there wouldn't be much to corroborate that, although Karen Gillan would then give an interview to Metro in 2019. She was playing the character of Amy Pond in Doctor Who at this time, which suggested that Johnny Depp's name was indeed in the mix. How close it got, don't know, but one of the people being talked about. Now, also in 2011, Stephen Moffat was still on Twitter at this point. He famously came off Twitter in the end, but at this point he was tweeting fairly regularly, and he wrote, to clarify, any Doctor Who movie would be made by the BBC team, star the current TV Doctor, and would certainly not be a Hollywood reboot. I mean, a shot across the bows, really. But he wouldn't throw David Yates under the bus. He said David Yates was speaking off the cuff on a red carpet. You've seen the rubbish I talk when I'm cornered. Now, Moffat had formed in the movies as well that when he took over the showrunner job on Doctor Who, it meant turning down writing the second Adventures of Tintin movie for Steven Spielberg and Peter Jackson. Moffat is one of the co-writers of the first Tintin film. We are still waiting for the second one, 15 years later. But he turned down Spielberg to go and do Doctor Who. Moffat had a way into the movies had he wanted desperately to push into the movies with this. And I mean, promotions ongoing then for Doctor Who Christmas specials that were running that year. And so Matt Smith and Karen Gillan were interviewed by Radio 1. Tell us about this film. Matt Smith saying, I've got no idea what it will be about. I doubt we'll be in it. Gillan saying there's always rumours about Doctor Who film. And she's the one who put in. I remember them saying Johnny Depp was going to be the Doctor at one point. What's interesting is following Stephen Moffat insisting, not unreasonably, that any Doctor Who project, and this was December 2011, would involve the Doctor Who team. You go 3 months later to March 2012, and David Yates was still insistent this was happening. He was still talking about it. But there was a little bit of change in how he was talking. So he was interviewed by Bleeding Cool, and he says, yes, he says this, yes, I'm definitely doing a Doctor Who movie. And then, I mean, he doubled down a little bit, but explained, I think where everyone got confused was that we're not making it for 5 years, 6 years. So this would have been a Doctor Who movie coming out in 2017, 2018. Spoiler, hasn't happened. Yates said, it's a very slow development. I've got projects backed up between now and about 2015. And it's something I'm very passionate and excited about. And there was the mutual respect for Stephen Moffat. He just said, Stephen's a genius. I love his work. I think he's incredibly clever. I love what he's done with Doctor Who. I love his Sherlock Holmes. I mean, Sherlock had come and been a ratings juggernaut around this time as well. He's such a gifted man. But Yates then said, this is something that's a very slow burn. I'm hoping to sit down with him at some point and have a chat. So there's the sentence. March 2012, 4 months after the original announcement, he's saying, I'm hoping to sit down with him at some point and have a chat. The implication of that was he'd not sat down with him and had a chat. But Yates added, it's just something that we've just been talking about for a little while. It didn't sound like they'd had a face-to-face. Social media, they've both been put in interviews, they've both been pleasant to each other. But still, this was an avoidable problem. And so Yates definitely said, I'm definitely doing it. That much is clear. I know one of the people who interviewed him. There was a rumour around the time that Sony was interested in partnering with BBC Worldwide and had actually got to the point of buying into the project, but I couldn't find corroboration of that. But Sony was said to be opening its checkbook, like the idea of a Doctor Who film. And then it was listed as an open writing assignment as well. They were looking for people specifically with motion picture credits, people who could turn Doctor Who into a 90-minute, 2-hour film. But then it's like there was kind of an assumption that it had just run out of steam a little bit. And David Yates sort of stopped giving interviews, really. Meanwhile, Doctor Who was still being made. BBC One, Stephen Moffat still writing, show running, and Matt Smith still the Doctor. And in early summer 2012, Moffat took Matt Smith and the Doctor Who team to San Diego Comic-Con. And he was insistent. He said, again, if there were to be a future film, quote, "It will be absolutely run by the Doctor Who production office in Cardiff. It will feature the same Doctor as on television." It was put to him at this point, the whole thing about David Yates saying, might need some kind of reboot. And Moffat said, "We'd love to make a film, but the idea of a rebooted continuity, a different Doctor that's writing the book on how to destroy a franchise, you don't behave like that with it, not ever." 2012, was also the fifth. It was Doctor Who, building up to its biggest ever party, really. The 50th anniversary episode of Doctor Who, Day of the Doctor, which would go out famously in cinemas as well. Day of the Doctor was broadcast on the 23rd of November 2013. And so Moffat at this point was kind of building up to writing that, putting that together. That's a story and a half of how that all came together. That was about a year and a half away, and the BBC Worldwide had thrown onto Stephen Moffat's plate this other thing that, he clearly didn't seem to be particularly keen on it. Then we go to an Entertainment Weekly interview in August 2012, again doing more promo for Doctor Who. And inevitably, journalists are just asking about it, and he's repeating the same thing. There isn't a film, Moffat told Entertainment Weekly. I can assure you definitively that was all nonsense. Already by this point, talking in the past tense. Just the tense has changed slightly. He said the BBC own Doctor Who, and for the moment, I run it for them. I can say that with authority because as far as the BBC is concerned, I'm the voice of Doctor Who, said Moffat. So if I say it, it's true. He's not leaving just as even the slightest sliver of wiggle room there. Then he added, I don't think David Yates was ever signed to it. I never signed him, so he's not. But I think he's expressed an interest in doing it, and he's a very fine director, and I think he'd certainly be someone that would be on the list for directing such a project. Moffat added, I'm a big fan of his, but the project, as he describes it, would not happen. It was all a bit more off the cuff than it seemed to be. Well, there was something there. Jane Tranter had been having the meetings, there had been conversations taking place, and David Yates didn't one day just pluck this out of his sorting hat and say, I'm going to do this. Someone had approached him, he'd expressed an interest, a contract may not have been signed, but by the end of 2012, the idea had clearly just fizzled out. Circumstances had worked against it. And the things that really had knocked it out were, first of all, Russell T Davies' personal situation, horrible story, and his ability to glue all the disparate parties together was out of the equation. But also David Yates letting the cat out the bag when he did, really just brought the project down. The 50th anniversary episode of Doctor Who, Day of the Doctor, famously then ended up in cinemas on the 23rd of November 2013. And ironically, the BBC Wales team that was, inverted commas, making a TV show would give Doctor Who a top 3 box office hit for in the era where we weren't used to video on demand and things being available on the telly over there on the same time that they're on the cinema screen. Doctor Who, I think it was number 2 at the UK box office for an episode of television that was being screened on television at the same time. The appetite was clearly there to see Doctor Who on the big screen. It took a 50th anniversary party really to do it, but the appetite was absolutely there. And several times since, Doctor Who episodes have screened in cinemas. Even more recently, in the Ncuti Gatwa era of Doctor Who, we've had finale episodes screening in cinemas, gets bums on seats. What there hasn't been has been a feature film since the two Peter Cushing movies, which in their own way are both anomalies. And the truth is, it fizzled for a bunch of reasons. And by 2015, Jane Tranter's come back to the UK anyway. She set up Bad Wolf Productions with Julie Gardner, another legend of Doctor Who. And I mean, I got to interview Stephen Moffat in 2017. And it was a far-reaching interview. I very briefly mentioned the possibility of a film. I wasn't even talking about a Doctor Who film, but a film. And the look in his eye said, I'm fed up of being asked about a Doctor Who film, taking it that's where I was going. And he just said, there will come a point, it was something along the lines of, there'll come a point where I won't have to answer this question again. I moved on very, very, very quickly. Karen Gillan, as I said, a couple of years later, would suggest that there was slightly more to it than perhaps we were being told at the time. But as she reconciled to the Metro, is the BBC going to let that happen? No way. This is one of the flagship shows. And now, as we find Doctor Who, we're just coming to an era where Disney money has poured into it, and Disney money is no longer going to be pouring into it. The BBC is shopping, we're told, is shopping the series round, looking for another worldwide commercial partner to help fund it. Who knows? That may yet open the door for a Doctor Who movie. But I bet you this, bet you David Yates doesn't direct it.